Catch these facts, not the plague. The theme of this year's National History Day is Frontiers in History. Our topic is on the effects of the plague on modern medicine, featuring Charles de Lorme and Nostradamus. The bubonic plague, otherwise known as the Black Plague, devastated Europe and parts of Asia between 1347 and 1351. The plague was a frontier in medicine history due to the advancing modern medicine used today. The Black Plague killed up to 60% of the European population. The cause of this catastrophic disease, though it was not known at the time, was that rats and fleas carried it. There were many advancements in medicine. For example, surgeons were developed due to the plague. It also gave way to a growth in hygiene. The bubonic plague gets its name from the swollen lymph nodes called buboes the disease causes. The Black Plague was caused because of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that carried the disease. Humans would become infected with the plague after being bitten by a rodent flea or animal that carried this bacterium. But how did the plague advance modern medicine today?
That's a good question, Caitlin. The Black Plague had many positive yet negative effects on modern medicine. After the Black Plague, many people perceived the plague a failure of God with answering prayers, which contributed to the decline in the church's power. Both doctors and medical practices were no longer held back by the church, due to it losing influence after the plague. Physicians were then allowed to advance their medical and surgical practices. The church had allowed dissection and surgery to a point, but after the plague, the church allowed dissection and surgery, which then gave way to a new form of surgeons. Before the Black Plague, medicine consisted of roots, flowers, and herbs. These herbal remedies would combine to create a cure for illnesses or medical issues. Many herbal remedies and practices developed due to the severity of the plague. Herbs such as meadowsweet and willowbark, herbs used to ease the pain of plague victims, might have been one of the first pain relievers. Due to their antimicrobial and buboes healing properties, lavender and rosewater baths were very common. After the plague, medical practices were redirected. The increase in practical writings makes it clear that physicians of major universities did not have complete control over plague medical pieces. With increasing emphasis on practical writing came an increase in the writing of surgical manuals, which then educated the common public to create more surgeons and doctors, thus advancing modern medicine. The language of medical writings changed as well, from Latin to vernacular, or Common English. As stated in The Black Death in the Future of Medicine by Sarah Frances Van Stett, works such as this, English Monks, John Lydigate's poem, both provides mostly practical evidence on staving off the plague that regular people could follow and demonstrate demand for plague writings from the general, non-medically trained but still somewhat educated public. This was one of the first leading factors that would let medical documents be accessible to anyone who could read and afford to obtain them.
We will now focus on more of the plague doctor's clothing and the doctors themselves, showing how that played a part in Black Death's history. The first mention of the plague doctor mask was found in a mid-17th century work written by one of King Louis XII of France's physicians. The doctors thought the mask prevented them from getting the disease through infected air, while all along the disease was transmitted through fleas. The mask wasn't the thing protecting the doctors from the plague. It was the full-length gown covered in wax. It prevented the fleas from getting any contact with the doctors. The claw-like gloves and the stick topped with a winged bat hourglass were minorly added to a couple of works by a plague doctor, Paulus I, who made a lot of pictures of the historical outfit. The most famous plague doctor was Charles de Lorme. He is the original creator of the plague doctor costume. He tended to many medical needs, including King Louis XIII and Gaston d'Orleans. Another famous doctor was Nostradamus. He gave other doctors great advice that changed the future of the plague, such as getting fresh air, drinking fresh water, and advising against bleeding the patient. Nostradamus was a beginning to medical advancement that changed the future of the plague. The mask they wore was about 15 centimeters long. Their attire consisted of a leather hat, a beak stuffed with herbs and spices, eye holes made out of glass, and a mask gathered at the neck. The doctor's clothing also has a wooden stick to keep people away, a full-length gown covered in wax worn over leather breeches, leather gloves, and full-length leather boots. The Black Plague wiped out about 25 million Europeans in just a few years. Out of desperation, doctors were hired that were either second-rate physicians, young physicians with limited experience, or people with no medical training at all. The effects of the plague were great. Trade was cut off and landowners' lives were ruined. Artisans' and peasants' wages were raised. Those were only some effects of the plague. The Black Plague was also known as the Black Death, or the bubonic plague. It lasted roughly from about 1347 to 1400, but without the doctors it would have been lasted much longer. They play a significant role in the Black Plague's history.
Throughout the years of 1347 to 1351, the Black Plague terrorized Europe, killing up to 25 million people. It is unclear what exactly caused the plague to end, but some scholars believe it was quarantining that ended the first Black Plague. Even today, quarantining is still being used, like we've seen during COVID-19. Many doctors were not medically trained and didn't have any experience with medicine, so this sparked many new remedies and medical practices that we're still using today. An example of this is bloodletting. Bloodletting is the practice of drawing out blood from someone's body. Today, it is being used in a much safer environment, but during the plague times, people used leeches to draw out infected blood, which was not a very effective method. Plague doctors wore long robes and a mask to protect themselves from the plague. The reason behind this was just one big misconception that the plague was spread through bad air. The quickly spread disease wiped out a third of the population. People began to question old practices, and many new medical theories were being adopted. The theme for this year's National History Day is Frontiers in History. The bubonic plague greatly represents this theme because it was a turning point in history.
Oh.